In the past 200 years, technology has significantly advanced. From the creation of the camera to little phones that now have cameras that we can carry in our back pockets, we have come a very far way. However, with these developments have also come the creation of social media and consequently a phenomenon called edits. Edits are clips of existing media that are reformatted into another singular video, and it frequently features other editing stylistic elements. So this might include additional audio, or it might include filters and captions. The first edit came to be approximately 50 years ago by Candy Fong, who put together clips of a Star Trek episode and presented it at a convention. We'll see how that appears now.
There's one thing you never did settle. What do you do with a drunken falcon? 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 What do you do with a drunken falcon early in the morning?
With advancements, now this is what the average edit might appear to be today.
What is it you want of me? I don't understand. I can't hear you. Oh, you got power.
Then I heard the voice of the Lord
Superpower.
saying, "Whom shall I
Do
send?
you even know how
All right.
to love them?
Who will go for us?"
All God's children
And
are special.
I said,
Not like you.
"Here am I.
No, not like you.
Send me."
Please, Lord. Help me get one more.
While edits have been around for around 50-ish years now, academic research that is available to the general public on edits is rather limited. One of the few studies that we do have was conducted by Kevin Munger, who is assistant professor at the State of Pennsylvania University, and it focuses on social data. So in his study, he analyzed how viewer perception of politicians, mainly Joe Biden and Donald Trump, were edited based on how the editing styles were. So they categorized edits into two different types. There was badass edits, which can be seen in figures A and figure C. So this tries to make the subject appear more tough, so it'll emphasize a dark overlay or a heavy beat to make them look brave and strong. And on the other hand, there are thirst trap edits, which can be seen in figures B and figures D. So the focus of these style is to make the politicians seem more attractive. So it'll typically feature them when they're younger and with other displays of attractiveness. So whether it be displays of wealth or other attractive people. And Kevin's Munger's study was based off of this video posted by Jules Turpak, who is a digital culture content creator on YouTube. While this is a rather casual source, because of the limited research that is available on edits, it is important for academic research to get a foothold based on the casual resources that are available to the general public. Another relatively understudied field, even though it seems to be rather consistent in everyday lives, is patriotism, how you identify with your country. So when you Google patriotism, the definition that appears is from the Oxford English Dictionary, and it reads, quote, "The quality of being patriotic, devotion to and vigorous support for one's country." So from this definition, we understand what patriotism is, but the question remains, how is someone patriotic? How does this patriotism translate into their everyday actions in their everyday lives? So, combining these two fields, I created my research question. How is American patriotism portrayed in TikTok edits of films? Given that I had not yet defined how patriotism is portrayed, I decided to create a framework definition of that. So I analyzed 5 different sources in order to frame my research around. So I analyzed a survey on civic engagement, an American survey on how people portray patriotism, the Oxford English Dictionary definition that we reviewed earlier, a literature review of different academic sources on how patriotism might appear, and the Declaration of Independence. So while the Declaration of Independence is rather dated compared to these sources, I still decided to include it because it remains relevant in government and politics and general perceptions of what being an American is today. We still study it in class, and it continues to be a very relevant document. So combining my analysis of these 5 sources, I created this framework definition of patriotism. Patriotism is a strong devotion to a country that one identifies with, vigorous support for said country, including virtues and issues out of love, care for said country's well-being, willingness to defy injustice to defend freedom, so long as such defiance remains lawful, and an intense value of democracy. So using this framework definition, I created my rubric, and I conducted a mixed methods content analysis. So I measured both quantitative and qualitative data to see how both of those influence how the edits perceived patriotism. So line 1 of my rubric focused on the quantitative data, and it was specifically the frequency in which different patriotic elements appeared. So this was things such as how often the American flag appeared, or how often themes such as freedom appeared across edits. Line 2, my rubric focused on the qualitative data. So this was the stylistic choices that the editor made. So this was things like the filters added and the audio overlaid. And then I also created an additional observations and notes portion so I can add the context in which these elements were seen in the edits. I also created an additional observations line for both the qualitative and the quantitative data, and so that way I could cover any potentially missing fields if they had not been prompted by my rubric. And then I left off with the connections and initial analysis portion to begin connecting the qualitative and the quantitative data, how they influence one another on each of the edits. So every single one of my steps that I conducted using social media, I did so with the precaution that my algorithm, as a personal TikTok user myself, would not influence my study, because I wanted to eliminate as much bias as possible. So I created a new email account, which I promptly used to create a new TikTok account. And then I used every single step on social media using a VPN to mask my IP address. And I also made sure to refresh the feed of that new TikTok account every time that I selected the edits I wanted to analyze, in order to ensure that TikTok wasn't creating an algorithm for me. But to cover any other errors with my rubric, I still decided to conduct a pilot test. So instead of selecting edits at random, I decided to choose the specific films in which I would select edits from. That way I can ensure that the film would be somewhat patriotic and the edits would have some relevance to what I was trying to study. So the criteria for the films were that they had to be American, feature an American lead, and they had to meet 2 out of 4 of the criteria of line 1 my rubric, which measured the patriotic frequency. I eliminated the 5th column when evaluating the movies, because the 5th column was edit performance, and that simply wasn't relevant to choosing the films. So for my pilot test, I decided to go with the film Fury, because it had been studied in one of the studies in my preliminary research for the patriotism in that film, so I knew that it would have been patriotic. So I then analyzed 3 different edits of Fury, and I edited my rubric accordingly. After this, I then moved on to my actual research. So I first picked out 5 different films to analyze. So I tried to choose films that had a range of time frame and also plot points, so that way I could be more representative of what people with different interests on TikTok might see. So I chose 5 films. This was Hacksaw Ridge, Captain America: The First Avenger, Rocky IV, Hidden Figures, and The Hate U Give. Rocky and Captain America are installments in franchises, but I still continued to analyze edits of those films if they had clips from other films, so long as those films were within the same franchise. I chose 6 edits from each of these films, so in total I analyzed 30 edits. And as a result, I found that courage and justice appeared most frequently across my edits. So courage appeared in 26 out of 30 edits, and justice appeared in 20 out of 30 edits. So let's see an example of how that appears in an edit of Captain America. As we saw throughout that edit, Captain America was very courageous. He was constantly going head first into battle, and in a way that also ties in with sacrifice. He was putting his life at risk in order to defend his country in World War II and in the future in other fictional wars in the Marvel Universe. We can also see from this snapshot a comparison of the original film clip to the edited film clip, and we can see how the different stylistic elements really shine through. So we can tell by here that the editor clearly added a filter, not only to color it, but also to make it appear darker. And there's also text on the screen. These are captions for the audio that we heard from the Mulan soundtrack. I also found that civic duty was pretty consistent across the edits, so acknowledging issues and speaking out about issues appeared most frequently in 12 out of 30 edits. And from data points such as these, I also found that some of the data correlated. So when one of them appeared, the other did. So in edits, if a character acknowledged an issue, they also spoke up about it. So let's see an example of that in The Hate You Give. In The Hate You Give, at the beginning of the film, a character named Khalil is shot and killed by a police officer who stereotypes him as dangerous because he is black. Really, Khalil was reaching for a hairbrush, but because of his race, the police officer assumed that Khalil was reaching for a gun and promptly shot him. So throughout the edit of The Hate You Give, we can see that characters are advocating for justice for Khalil, which is another patriotic theme. However, from the screenshot, we can also see the civic duty that appears. So we see that people are acknowledging an issue, they're speaking up about it, and they're protesting, they're organizing in a community. We can also see how the editors might play on the stylistic elements to align more with the plot of the movie, or even to convey their perception of the plot. So as I said earlier, Khalil was not reaching for a gun, he was reaching for a hairbrush. And the audio that was used in this edit, the creator used a song from the musical Chicago, in which they constantly repeat, they reach for the gun, the gun, the gun. And so when captioning this, they put gun in quotation marks in order to convey that it wasn't a gun, and that aligns with the film's plot. So as a recap, my research question was, how is American patriotism portrayed in TikTok edits of film? I originally approached my study with the hypothesis that patriotism will be portrayed positively through elements such as freedom, justice, and democracy. However, after analyzing my edits, I found that the evidence supported that patriotism was ultimately positively portrayed. However, it was largely portrayed through courage and justice. What surprised me the most out of my data was how infrequently pride appeared. So when pride appeared, it only appeared in 2 out of 30 edits, when in my framework definition, pride had been a pretty consistent thing across all the sources I analyzed, whether they were academic or historical. And when pride did appear in these 2 instances, it wasn't necessarily directly related to pride in being American. On the other hand, it actually related to pride in racial identity, particularly in being black. So from this screenshot of an edit of The Hate You Give, the main character's father is telling her and her siblings to be proud of their racial identity in spite of hatred that they might experience from others. This doesn't necessarily mean that the lack of pride across these edits means that pride isn't integral into being an American or being an American patriot. It can actually mean quite the opposite. It can mean that being a patriot means being prideful of your identity, so much so that it's already assumed to be part of it, that you don't need to state it outright. So why does all of this matter? Increasingly, we're seeing political campaigns try to connect with youth voters who have historically had the lowest turnout, a statistic that is increasingly on the decline. So youth voters tend to be the largest demographic that uses social media. So politicians are increasingly using social media to get across their platform ideas and honestly just try to boost their campaign to voters. So as we saw in 2024 with Kamala Harris's campaign, she rebranded her entire campaign to revolve around Charli XCX's new album, Rap, because teenage editors were making edits of her campaign to songs from that album. While Kamala Harris's campaign was unsuccessful, it was extremely high profile and it catapulted her into the spotlight, even with a little over 100 days to campaign. So of course there was limitations to my study. For one, I conducted a content analysis, and content analysis is subjective. I am only one person. I did not have a team of researchers behind me, so my personal biases and my outlooks on life could have influenced how I analyze these edits. Doesn't necessarily mean that my analysis was wrong per se, it just might mean that I have a different perspective from another researcher. More so, my study was limited to 30 edits. TikTok not only currently has a plethora of content, but new content is consistently being put out every single day. So 30 edits isn't going to be representative of what every single TikTok user is going to see. A future study might need to feature more edits. Going back to Jules Turpak's video, which we mentioned a little earlier, she analyzed how edits appeared in so many different contexts. I focused on film and TV examples. However, she also went over how it might appear in business and music, politics, and even in a personal narrative. Some people make edits of themselves. So there is so many different contexts in which a future study could analyze edits in. And more so, as I said, content analysis is subjective. So a future researcher could reconduct my study or reformulate it to see different results of even the same edits, or if they so choose, of a different edit in order to come to the same conclusion or to peer review of whether or not my conclusion might be applicable to a wide range. Thank you.
Thank you. How did you determine, I don't know, how did your initial exploration of the scholarly conversation lead to your final research question or project goal?
Well, my initial research was actually quite different from what I came to in the end. My initial focus was on civic education and how that influenced how social media users were able to analyze memes. However, that study didn't become feasible for me because of my methodology. It wasn't within my resources as a high school student. So I then promptly wanted to expand on that to have similar themes since I was already within the school year, but also have an element that I enjoyed. So I really enjoy films, so that led me to try to combine my initial elements with films. So using research from the memes and also from how civic engagement and civic education might vary across states, which I found would actually influence how people might perceive being American. So if you were educated in Alabama per se versus in Connecticut, your views on what being an American might be would vary across states. So I decided to combine that perception of being an American with films and with memes or short form videos and content to create my now research question.
All right, what are the real world implications or consequences related to your findings?
As I mentioned earlier, the amount of research that is available on edits is rather limited. So with this research study, I have now formulated a method in which one could approach analyzing edits in. One of the most difficult things about analyzing audiovisual media is the process of actually creating a methodology in which you could also explain to a viewer, perhaps in a paper where you cannot insert the video, of how you analyze your data. So creating a new method opens different avenues to future researchers to get a foothold onto where they want to redirect their research.
Thank you.
All right, if you could revisit your research process, what would you do differently and why?
As I mentioned earlier, I analyzed 5 different films, and I tried my best to analyze films of different plot points. However, if I could redo my study, I think that I would have had films that had greater variation. For example, 3 of my films, Rocky, Hacksaw Ridge, and Captain America, focused a lot on combat, while the other 2 focused on racial injustice, and the 2 that focused on racial injustice were the only ones that had female leads. So perhaps editing the different film types that I analyzed might have influenced my research results by seeing how different themes appear across the edits.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.